instrumental in the whole process of Africa's economic development. How true. Our second thought, healthcare and social services. According to a World Health Organization report, you may want to listen to this, about 60% of healthcare delivery in Africa is orchestrated by the church and or faith-based platforms. This is substantial in the backdrop of the fact that public health provision is hampered by weak governance, management flaws, and limited financing. In general, African governments allocate arguably less than 10% of their budgets to healthcare, and as such, the health sector is characterized by a short supply of health workers, depleted and dysfunctional health systems, limited availability of essential drugs, and poor health infrastructures. I come from the northern part of Nigeria, and I can tell you that these are not just theoretical statements. It's unfortunate when you get to some of these areas in Nigeria for a case study. I've traveled quite extensively across the African continent, and I've been met with very disappointing expressions of pain and, health issues, even across many supposedly cosmopolitan cities. Healthcare in Africa still remains a very serious issue, even among the organized African societies. In this difficult and challenging setting, church health services have dominated the provision of healthcare across the continent. Apart from missionary health facilities, the church has continued to play an invaluable role in offering preventive and curative medical services, particularly the local communities. The church has made significant contributions towards the primary healthcare program, such as provision of basic packages of health services to rural and underserved communities, assisting communities to develop and implement locally relevant and sustainable health programs, and ensuring access to health services for the most vulnerable and marginalized groups. The church health services have put more emphasis on the most rural and isolated communities where no other healthcare provider exists. In remote and poor localities which do not have roads or good road networks, and where people have to walk sometimes, and you believe this, for more than a day to reach the nearest hospital available, the church has maintained services that would easily have been abandoned by the state. This has not only served to bridge the gap in healthcare delivery, but also demonstrated the church's strong presence in uplifting the standard of such communities. The third area of focus in examining Africa's role is the area of economic empowerment, and particularly I'm looking at entrepreneurship, job creation, and social aid. The church has increasingly engaged in Africa's economic and social development by providing various supports and value-adding economic empowerment services for the well-being of the African people. For example, the church has been involved in giving both spiritual support and material contribution to the poor, the needy, and the less privileged within their churches and communities. I can tell you that myself and our organization have been actively involved in this wise. We've launched various programs. There currently is an agricultural empowerment program, and we've spent millions and millions of naira just putting together professionals along that line to help train and empower people. This came as a response to the harsh economic reality that is plaguing Africa, and that includes Nigeria, even though the largest nation within the African continent. The church has been actively involved in collaborating with private organizations and governmental institutions to help create jobs, give professional career trainings and workshops, set up entrepreneurship and business programs to as many individuals and local communities at large. Many churches have been at the back of the rise of many startups and SMEs with a view to promoting economic empowerment within their regions and extending same across the entire continent. Our fourth area of consideration, peace and religious tolerance. I took a deep breath because this is quite an interesting one. Religion has been a force of both good and ill in the stability of the African countries. This is the fact. In several destabilizing conflicts, conventional or low level, faith and religion have served as important undertones and sometimes as the outright basis for conflict and wars. Examples of these factors or examples of these kinds of incidences are, for a case study, the Boko Haram insurgency in northern Nigeria. This has largely been driven by extremist views. And then you may want to consider the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda that was formed in 1987 by Joseph Kony with the aim of overthrowing the Ugandan government of Yoweri Museveni and establishing a Christian theocratic state. In several other conflicts, religion has been an undertone, even if not a formal basis of conflict. In Nigeria, again, for instance, the conflict between the Fulani herdsmen, many of you have heard this or probably followed the trend through the lens of media. The conflict between the Fulani herdsmen and the farmers in the Middle Belt regions are often understood as fueled by land scarcity, grazing rights, and climatic change. But the truth is that they have a very strong religious undertone. The herdsmen are usually men of extremist views and practices, and the farmland communities they displace as part of the land grabbing program sometimes and most times are usually occupied or belong to Christian communities. This has been proven without any sense of prejudices, biases, or sentiments. In many regards, the law enforcement agencies on apprehending many of these extremist herdsmen, most of them have been found to be people who sustain extremist views, and their victims have usually been people of the Christian faith. But religion has also been a force for peace and peace building in Africa, contributing to possibilities for development. In Mozambique, for a case study, which experienced a 16-year civil war between Renamo and the Frelimo forces that left 1 million people dead and ended in 1992. Mozambique's churches played a decisive mediation role that ended the war. Interfaith religious groups have also played strong roles in peace building, in civil conflicts, in nations like Cote d'Ivoire and the Central African Republic. The church and many other religious bodies have played significant roles in the release and the freedom of many victims of kidnap and abductions, as we have in many parts of Nigeria, including the Middle Belt and so on and so forth. In fact, extending to all the African nations. I remember one time I returned from a meeting and I was met with a very serious distress call. And on responding, I was told that the abductors had taken some people that were affiliated to me. It was a group of people who had returned from a program, and all of them were abducted, and they were given 24 hours to present 50 million naira, else every one of them would be slaughtered. And because they were closely related to me, we mobilized, to inform the law enforcement agents, but clearly there seemed to be only so much they could do. And sadly, we had to get people, even of other faiths, to be able to talk perhaps with the abductors, if they could show kindness and mercy, and you would not believe the cruelty that came, cruel statements from those conversations. Sadly, one was shot on the foot. Usually, those levels of mayhem are unleashed to get you to see that they are serious. To cut the long story short, we ended up spending up to 20 million naira, even in the presence of law enforcement agents. Thankfully, they were all released. And we had the opportunity. You see, the challenge is when these people are released, they still are not fine. The trauma that they have to go through, some of them go through rape, some of them go through all kinds of traumatizing things, and it's one thing to get them free, then begin a process of constructive rehabilitation. Because some of them, even without the activity of terrorists again, they may end up dying. The trauma becomes too much, you see. And so I'm not just saying this as a lecture. These are realities that some of us have been forced to live with, especially when you become a leader within these regions. You cannot shy away from being part of the process that leads to some of these things. And so I'm just using that to point that the church has played very significant roles on this wise. Furthermore, the church has played significant roles in resolving ethnic and religious clashes in many parts of Africa. And in fact, have become partners with government and law enforcement agents in the promotion of peace, tolerance, and mutual respect. Religious bodies have actively organized peace concerts. Our organization has done that too as a case study. And so my work started largely in Zaria, for those of you who are familiar with Nigeria. And for many years, we experienced all kinds of religious crises. And so we came up with an initiative to hold periodic peace concerts. And the intent is not to advocate fanaticism. I'll be talking a bit about that before I conclude my discourse. And we successfully brought people from all religions, taking away all kinds of prejudices and promoting love. And you wouldn't believe how productive these concerts were. People came, we had all kinds of welfare activities, and people, Christians, Muslims, and any other person in between, they came, and it was very productive. I can tell you today that I have very good friends that cut across the religious divides. Very productive discussions. We may not agree on the core matters of faith, but I do not think it's been enough reason to hate, to fight, and so on and so forth. Are we together? Okay, so religious bodies have actively organized peace concerts, interfaith forums, sport activities, and public discussions in many parts of Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa with a view to bridging the gap of intolerance and promoting peace and mutual respect. Challenges and criticisms. Like every and any other system led and managed by humans, there will always be limitations, compromises, excesses, and ill practices. Faith, spirituality, and religion has had its share of the aforementioned challenges. This has led to criticisms from various quarters and strong reservations as to the overall relevance and practice of faith in our contemporary society today. There is still a lot of growth and improvement, truly, that needs to be brought to the current context of faith and spirituality, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Matters of neocolonialism by the religious and political elites, advocacy of laziness and irresponsibility through wrong and extremist teachings, lack of transparency and accountability in leadership, even Christian leadership, moral failures within faith-based systems, are all issues that, whether now or in the future, I presume, will have to be confronted if the relevance of faith in nation building and socio-economic development is to be preserved. My concluding thoughts. It is very clear that faith and spirituality still hold great significance in shaping the African continent as far as its future and destiny is concerned. But it is also very clear, and sadly so, that still falls short of its potential. I have a very brief discussion with the head of politics at the Abuja U.S. Embassy. Subjects that we spoke about was the idea of the kinds of teachings that people become victims of the orientations that come to them. And because Africa is a very religious continent, most of the ill taught and practiced in Africa, there will have to be a growing orientation that transcends faith, spirituality, and religion from a mere advocacy of fanaticism, societal transformation and nation building, to one that will, in greater measures, spearhead the campaign for moral excellence, honor to all men. We must introduce superior policies that stimulate growth and development while preserving the fundamental human rights of all and sundry. This way, faith and religion will remain potent forces of change, socio-economic development, and will become active in the world at large. I hope that these thoughts that I've shared with us have helped us to really see that in the midst of all the conflicts that surround faith, spirituality, and religion, that from the lens of history and from the factors that I've put before you, I think it is safe to say that faith still holds value and relevance in our contemporary society, especially sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you very much for your attention. God bless you.
Come on, ladies and gentlemen, that was Apostle Joshua Selman. Can we make that round of applause more? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We may now have our seats. Okay, so I know that we're going to have a lot of questions to ask. So can we just put your thoughts together, make it very brief. If I tap my microphone, it means that your question is getting too long. All right, so put that together and think it through, so we can give enough people the opportunity to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, Apostle Selman has walked us through the interconnectedness of man and the relationships and linkages that man has shown over the period. He also exposed us to the history of religion, history of faith in Africa. Some things I had never heard, even though I'm a development student. And then he went on to look at Christianity, faith, and religion, and picked on 3 poignant points where it has actually, where they have played significant roles. Education, which we all know, health and social services, economic empowerment, and peace and religious religious tolerance. Interestingly, he also looked at the criticisms. So we've not probably done it fully well. And then has encouraged each and every one of us to begin to make the right changes. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, please put your hands for Apostle Joshua Selman. Okay, so we're going to be having a very quick fire chat. I will try not to throw the first shot, but I probably have to. And I'll try to be very gentle, sir. But sitting with Apostle Selman, Professor is not so bad. Yeah, it's not so bad. Okay, is Professor Olupano. His credentials are I'll take another 10 minutes to go through that. So permit me not to. He will be hearing the thoughts from both of them. First shot, and I'm going to look away from my notes. When we look at the growth of Christianity and the growth of the development growth of various continents, the three continents that has shown significant growth in religion and in Christianity, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. But the growth in religion in these continents and the economic growth in the continents are quite not matching. So I'm just wondering, do you have a thought on why religion is growing in Latin America and economic growth is on the increase? Why it's the same with Asia? Asia is, of course, more bludgeoning than the rest of them. And then Africa is not doing so well. Are we missing it somewhere? What are we doing wrong? And what role has religion got to play with it? Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, like I said during my lecture, nations, one of the cardinal reasons why nations become great is the strength of their policies. And policies are a reflection of the convictions. It is a man's conviction that is translated to the laws that govern any territory. And so when nations fail, it is not necessarily because of faith. It is because of the practice, the way and manner that faith is practiced. I give you an example. This is a phone that can be used for both good and evil. A terrorist can use this phone to destroy, for instance, and someone can use this phone to save lives. So whether through destruction or salvation, it still came from the same phone. It was just how it was used. So it's been my advocacy, and if you notice in my lecture, I said how that I think the challenge with Africa, in spite of the growing churches, that there has to be a re-examination of the content and the practice of faith. So the problem is not faith in itself, but the approach. For instance, extremisms. For instance, advocacies of hate. For instance, wrong teachings, even from the Bible, that have made irresponsible people to become, responsible people to become irresponsible. When you teach on things like grace and favor and so on and so forth, if not balanced, will put an individual to leave everything about the making of his destiny to the hands of God while not taking responsibility. So I think that those who spearhead the faith-based platforms, of course, in addition to the leadership that is largely in Africa. So it's a leadership problem at any level, whether spiritual leadership, economic leadership, political leadership. In one word, the reason for the stuntedness, in spite of spirituality, is leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Lukman, can we have your take, sir?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to this forum. I just told Ruth that she's leading a revolution on campus here. She may not know it, but I think we're aware of it. It's a pity that the Dean of Divinity School, Professor Mala Frederick, is not around. He's a professor of Pentecostalism. I would have loved for her to be here, because I know that very soon the Divinity School will have the opportunity to hire a professor in global Christianity, which simply means Christianity in the South. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Let me thank you for this very powerful speech. The last time we had a Nigerian to give such a lecture here was the Sultan of Sokoto, who gave what they call the Jodidi lecture at the Weatherhead Center. We will surely bring you back. That was a very interesting question that you posed to us. And I think it relates to one of the issues that the apostle mentioned, which I will repost as what we call lived religion, the praxis itself, where religion is seen, say Christianity, not just as a place where you go to worship, or even as a faith you defined, but almost like a heritage that you are born into it, and you own it, and you claim it, and you practice it. We're lacking this, and this is the root of our problem. Don't be surprised that myself and a group of people, we have taken the Anglican Church of Nigeria to court here. We've gone to court twice. This is my first time of going to court. But we have to to defend the faith, to defend Christianity, Nigerian Christianity in America, from, cash and carry Christianity. So until that kinds of thing, that the prophets even talked about the Torah that is in the heart, that prepares you as a Christian, not what you just hear and you sing and you go home and you think it is finished. This is the kind of revolution that we need. And I think this is what the apostle saw. This is my first time of listening to this type of conversation. It's usually a conversation on Christianity given by scholars. And I'm glad you mentioned at least an African scholar, Bediako, in very insightful summary of the history of Christianity. I could also mention my late teacher, Ogbukalo, who used to be at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, who unfortunately died some years ago. That praxis is important. And that praxis will also translate into governance.